A new Congress convened in January in Washington, and it's controlled by Republicans. So we've given Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat who represents the 2nd District, a few weeks to learn about the new Congress. But Mark, welcome back to Wisconsin.
Oh, glad to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Let's talk something very much in the news right now. You were at the hearing yesterday at the Toma VA Center. What did you learn from it? Lessons learned going forward, sir?
Sure. First of all, I think everyone there, regardless if you're a senator, a member of the House, a member of the public who's there, regardless of your party affiliation, you came out of there realizing that a lot more has to be done to make sure we're providing the best possible health care, not just at the Toma facility, but at all facilities across the country, and with a specific emphasis on this use of opiates and prescription of opiates for pain management. Specifically, what came out of it for me, I think that was new from what I've seen from some of the news reports and how it's been covered, is one, I used to be on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. We had a lot of Inspector General reports. I really think they did a very sloppy job, and we got a chance to ask some questions of the Inspector General who was there. One thing that was frustrating was the fact that they had administratively closed this report, so you couldn't just get access to it. So they do about 50, 60 reports a year. In a 3-year period, 25 they administratively closed. But for us to get the information, Senator Baldwin had to go and make a Freedom of Information request. That's the only one they got in 3 years. So because Senator Baldwin went above and beyond, we even got to the point to get the report. But then when you look at the report, and it didn't say anything was done, any wrongdoing or anything else, it said, there's some recommendations for change. They never even went and met with the VA and Toma afterwards to make sure those were implemented. And then when we had some of the testimony from people who've lost family members,
yes,
even more so we saw that they didn't do a very comprehensive job of really investigating when they're using opiates for PTSD, which you're not supposed to do, versus pain management, etc. So I think what came out of it, in my opinion, was that report, one, they were way too secretive, and two, it wasn't very conclusive, that we needed to do more work. That's what's all happening right now, but we need to do a lot of this right now, not just the fact they've done a few changes already in the Toma facility, but around just the pain management issue and why that was Candyland and overprescription and what that means with different drug interactions and affecting real people's lives and family members. We need more to get done, not just at Toma, but across the country.
This problem didn't just occur at the Toma VA hospital, did it, Congressman?
No, but they had a particularly high delivering of opiates because of one of the doctors who was there.
Yes.
But one of the people who testified was the pharmacist there, who basically 2 weeks before her probationary period, 1 year, was let go because she was refusing to fill some of the prescriptions because she saw the problems. We also don't have safe enough things in place for whistleblowers like that who wanted to tell us what was going on. So in the end, the Inspector General report was not enough. It didn't go the right direction. We're now getting to the right direction, but we've got to make sure that we move quickly and fast on this. And I think that the VA, when they were there, Dr. Clancy was there from the VA, they really are moving on things now, but it is a no thanks to the Inspector General report that was so secretive.
Well, let me ask you a larger question about Washington. Is there a cover-up mentality in Washington? The Veterans Administration, Secret Service agents may have been intoxicated, and suddenly those tapes are erased. Talk to me, now that you've been in Congress, in Washington a few years, a cover-up mentality in some of these federal agencies?
Well, there's a big bureaucracy, right? So one of the things that I said to the Inspector General yesterday, who was there, is now they're going to release all of them on their websites, all the reports. I said, why don't you, if there's 50 or 60 a year, it's a little attachment, an email, send it to every member of Congress. We'll decide if it affects our district, if it affects a constituency we have, if it affects something on a committee that we're interested in. But why the secrecy? I mean, you can provide that information. They do generally a good job. They're supposed to do a real solid review of something, and the fact that it's not that easy to access makes no sense at all. Taxpayers are paying for that. Why wouldn't we have information like that? I do think that there's a bureaucracy mentality sometimes in Washington that seems to block logic, and I deal with it right now. I've got a constituent who has property that F-16 crashed on the neighboring property, and the debris and the fire extended to her property. It took out a whole bunch of trees. After 2 years, this woman dealt with 24 different people at the Department of Defense to try to figure this out. She, that same time, was going through a number of operations. Finally, she called up one day and said, hey, I haven't got my check yet. And they're like, you haven't even filed for it yet, and you've got 2 weeks left.
Oh.
And you have to get some kind of a special assessment done or figuring out what this is going to cost. So she did all that, dropped it in the mail the day that it was due, like we do your taxes, and then was told because it didn't arrive by the day it was due, they couldn't even look at it. That's the kind of bureaucracy that I deal with sometimes, and then we try to figure out how to get around that.
All right. Is her case closed? Or are you fighting to reopen
it? What happened is she didn't contact us, unfortunately, early enough, so it got denied. Then she appealed it, and it got denied again based on the exact same thing. She missed the date, and then we got involved. So we've tried to talk to them about it. We've had interesting conversations with them. We even went to a consumer reporter to go talk about it, because really it's kind of one of these things that's ridiculous. You know, everyone knows when you deal with the federal government, you deal with your taxes, you mail it by April 15th, and that's filing your taxes on time. And for anyone to think there's any different process, especially given the circumstances she went through and all the work she went through to try to get the right information, there certainly should have been a different set of circumstances. No one denies an F-16 crash did damage to her property.
Right.
It's all about a deadline, and that's the kind of stuff that doesn't make sense, and that's where we try to get involved as aggressively as possible.
Well, just one follow-up on the TOMA. Haven't both Senators Baldwin and Johnson admitted that their staff didn't respond to these complaints as quickly as they wish they would have, sir?
I'll tell you, I look at it slightly different, because if you right now would look at that report, you would not have done a whole lot with it, because it told you there was no wrongdoing and things are being addressed, and he even told us he would do nothing different because he thought things were addressed. So in a way, I think both of the senators are taking a little extra grief, where my grief goes to the Inspector General had a report that wasn't a very good conclusion, and given everything we know about this, they didn't do their job sufficiently enough to really raise that red flag, and the fact that you had to have anonymous letters come out on this to get us even as far as we've gotten, and some media reports to cover to get us as far as we've gotten, tells us that the job wasn't done properly to begin with by the Inspector General, and that's really, I think, where I lay most of the blame. The VA now is responding, but they didn't know either if you don't have a good Inspector General report, so it goes back to that report.
Okay, now let's talk about Congress. How is it different now that the Republicans control both houses, Mark?
Well, you would think that would mean legislation gets passed.
I thought they vowed to govern.
Yes, that's what we all thought. Harry Reid, you can no longer blame Harry Reid for everything, that happened like they did in the past when the House was Republican and the Senate was Democratic. The problem is, and I've talked about it before, the 30 or 40 hardcore Tea Party folks in the House that block everything, and Boehner lets that tail wag the dog.
Is their number bigger than it was a year ago?
It's now 40 or 50 folks.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's part of the problem. So Speaker Boehner is still letting that tail wag the dog, but the tail is growing, and now we got the hind end of the dog as well, and we're getting a little bit more of that group that's there. So a lot of Republicans, for example, on my floor in the Cannon building, get even more frustrated than I do that nothing's moving, because they're in the majority and they'd like to see things happen. But when we pass a 1-week extension of funding for Homeland Security, when we don't address all the things we need to around a transportation bill and all the other issues that are out there, we're not doing our jobs. And unfortunately, the only way something gets on the floor of the House in 99.8% of the time, approximately, is when the Speaker puts it there. There's only one other way, a discharge petition, but then you have to ask people on the other side of the aisle to sign a discharge petition, which often gets them in trouble with their leadership. And the last time that happened on the House, I believe, was the McCain-Feingold law. So it's taken quite a while for something like that to actually raise to that level. So it's just difficult. If Boehner doesn't stand up to them, we wind up not passing very much.
So is Congress even more gridlocked than it was a year ago on the issues that you just outlined? Transportation,
it has been
immigration.
All of a sudden, absolutely, on immigration, nothing is moving. Transportation, I hope we'll do something to get the funding done, because it runs out in May.
That was a very temporary.
Well, then by temporary,
it was a Band-Aid
we've done things even more temporary. That's how bad the operation is. Glenn Grothman and I had this conversation on the floor, and I don't think he would mind if I said it. He said things ran so much more smoothly in the Wisconsin legislature than they do in Congress, and he's right. I mean, I've often said, things may have moved like a tortoise here, but there they move like an upside-down tortoise. You can see the little slow-moving turtle legs flailing, and it just doesn't get done. But under this current configuration, with the House, really being dominated by a small number of people, it does make it very difficult to get things done. The Education and Secondary Education Act, Elementary Secondary Education Act, we passed through committee, had amendments, debate on the floor. They had to pull it because they couldn't get the votes for that either. It's just we keep on running into this brick wall of getting things done that we have to get done.
Is it going to be dysfunction forever?
I hope not. There was a positive sign right before we left. We did get this SGR fix that includes some CHIP funding and some other issues, and it was a huge bipartisan vote, and I think it's largely because they realized that they weren't going to get some of those Tea Party folks, so they kind of worked with us in crafting it.
Yes.
and then we all left town. People forget about that. I'm hoping that we can duplicate that again, because there are a lot of things we have to do. No one's going to get everything they want. That's compromise. That's, you've been covering this for decades and you know how it works, but we have to be able to do that. That was an example of how Washington worked among many, many, many examples of how we don't work.
There's been a lot happening in the Mideast, and I'm just interested in your impressions on Prime Minister Netanyahu comes at the invitation of Republicans, and President Obama is even angrier, I think, with him over his pre-election statement, no two-state, and then he walked that back. And you have such developments in the Mideast, in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq. Gee, where's the question there?
Yeah.
Which is the scariest scenario? Are we in a worse situation from a foreign policy standpoint? There's my question. As a result of some of these things I've just taken too long to outline.
Yeah, and as long as you get to outline, that's how complex it really is, right? I mean, one, I think Speaker Boehner made a mistake by making an invitation without consulting the White House like they always do for a head of state.
Protocol dictates that. Exactly,
and Netanyahu shouldn't have accepted, but he never should have been invited by Speaker Boehner, so some of the blame goes there. I think the statements that Prime Minister Netanyahu made before the election around two-state and also around Arab voters.
Arabs voting in droves.
Were, things that he's going to have to deal with that are going to affect the relationship somewhat as we move forward. We're on the cusp of a deadline with Iran around a nuclear deal, and now we saw they may be backing out of a little very important part of it that allows us to make sure that they're not building a nuclear weapon. So those are some very complex issues we have to deal with. I think some of the positive is watching this week, watching Saudi Arabia take the lead in Yemen on something right now is exactly probably how it should be happening. People in the region leading and doing things rather than U.S. coming in to fix every potential problem in any region of the world. That might be a very positive sign, because it seems to be right now working and they're bringing a coalition together. But it's a very complex region. There's a lot of different players around religious division, around country division, around all sorts of things. And you can't say there's any single solution to the region because there's so many problems. Certainly made more complex by, I think, what just happened with the Prime Minister and the trip to the U.S. and with this very important deadline around the nuclear capacity of Iran.
Are you worried about the state of U.S.-Israel relations, Mark?
I think the people of the U.S. and the people of Israel have a very tight bond, and that's not going to go away. I think the fact that a political leader like Netanyahu did what he did makes it more complicated for the relationship with the U.S., and I think we will get through that, because I think the people in both countries understand that we've got that special bond with Israel. But Netanyahu certainly did no favors to the relationship, and actually I think his comments really show why this has been so difficult, that we've been involved in this peace process. But if someone who's involved in the peace process is supposedly a serious player says there will be no two-state solution.
No state solution.
I don't know how you can take that too seriously as far as we move forward.
The president said, I have to take the Prime Minister of Israel at his word.
Yeah, and he's now taking back that word, but which word was it? The pre-election word or the post-election word, or which word? And so it's a complex region, and I'll tell you, Secretary of State, whoever takes that job, I give them a lot of kudos for being willing to go in that spot, because it's certainly a difficult position.
On domestic issues, the GOP announced a budget, and your Democratic team announced a budget. What are the major differences? Well, first, one thing I want to ask is, getting ready for this interview, I read one story that said your budget has a $6 trillion in deficits, but the GOP's has $1.3 trillion. If that's not right, set Wisconsin I viewers straight.
Yeah, almost all that stuff's wrong.
Okay.
The budget process is largely a kabuki dance of some sort, right? With people trying to show and say what it's about, and generally whatever they say isn't very true in the end, I find. So the House budget was supposedly going to balance in 8 years, but it still does the same tricks that the Paul Ryan budget did, which is get rid of the Affordable Care Act but keep the revenue and savings. I mean, that's billions off. It did another thing that was almost $1 billion off in it. So it doesn't say anything, and there's no specifics in their budget. So they knew under Paul Ryan's budget, Paul Ryan talked specifically tax policy to bring the rate down to 25%, which would mean millionaires would get a $200,000 a year tax break, but the middle class would pay $2,000 more. Well, they realized it didn't go over so well. So what do? It's page after page, and I used this in the committee, of the exact same language except for 50 words around the specific rate change. So it's the same stuff, but they said, well, yeah, we're not saying it's 25%. Yes, all the other pages said that. You just took out the exact word. So a lot of it is this for show. What I hope is generally the Senate seems to behave more adult-like in that they have to, have a little more of a bipartisan agreement to get past the closure rule, and that we'll wind up with something that gets closer to that. But if they refuse to talk to the president along the way, then again, it's just all for show, it's all theater. The problem is it's a dangerous theater if at some point we don't fund transportation and we don't have the right money invested in research and all the rest. And how can, in Wisconsin, just example, and I give Mark Gottlieb a lot of credit because I think Mark has done a really good job in trying to make sure that we're adequately addressing the funding needs and trying to figure out where the funding is coming. If you don't know where your federal funding is coming, how can you do that long-range planning you have to do to build the roads? How can a road builder properly know what equipment they have to plan on depending what project is coming 2 or 3 years down the road, because sometimes there's a lag time to get the equipment. All we're doing is making it worse, and I see that happen all too often. And what I'm hopeful of is at some point there will be just this frustration with the lack of action, that people get tired of going back home and getting grief for Congress not acting, and you can't point fingers anymore at anyone, that people will finally stand up to that 40 or 50 people. We'll get things done. I may not like everything, but at least we'll compromise and get something done.
Yes, but I think you've had that hope for, 2 or 3 election cycles,
You have to, otherwise how could you do this? Otherwise I'd be like under my desk, shaking my head in a fetal position. You've got to be optimistic, and you've got to help try to get towards that.
One more question about domestic policy. What if the U.S. Supreme Court invalidates the Affordable Care Act subsidies in states like Wisconsin, which don't have their own marketplace or exchange?
Right.
Has anybody got a plan B out in D.C.?
I assume they're looking at options. However, everything I'm hearing is that they feel very confident where they're at on this. I mean, anyone can file these cases. Whether or not they're winnable or not is a whole other issue. And people feel very confident that they're in a good position on the case. So I think that's where we're trying to, have the conversation at. I hope that they're looking at something in case something does happen through the Supreme Court, but I would hate to see the millions of people suddenly lose their access to health care, because largely it's done what we'd hoped. 16 million people now have access to health care that maybe didn't have access to affordable health care before, either through the federal exchange, state exchanges, expanded Medicaid, children staying on their parents' policy, much less the benefits of no longer can you be denied for pre-existing conditions, no longer are women going to pay more than men. I mean, all the other things that came with the law. And I just got done talking to someone who used to be the head of one of the hospitals here in town, and talked about how the curve on healthcare used to be spiking way more than inflation, and it's been dead flat since the law passed. So we've had a lot of pluses coming out of this. If the Supreme Court decides to do something different than what we think the law is going to interpret, we'll figure out what to do next, but at this point we feel pretty strong. Okay,
now let's talk some national politics. How much damage has been done to Hillary Clinton by the email flap controversy?
It depends.
Significant or just...
At this point, no. If it turns out there's something that was done intentional, if it turns out something that was trying to be hidden in some way, then it might have some legs. But right now, honestly, I kind of understand. They give me an iPhone when I first started, right? It's my official government one. I have my personal one. I have to carry around 2 phones. It's not fun to do, right? Some people have 3 because then they have one for the campaign or something else. At what point, you're going to be weighed down which phone? So I finally was able to, with a special piece of software on my personal phone, I could have an encryption thing to be able to get my official email, so I could get it down to a single device. But it is complex when you're moving around for 12 or 14 hours a day, much less what the Secretary of State's going through. So I understand, I think, what she was trying to do. Whether or not it made sense to have it on your personal server versus some other things, there probably could have been better decisions made, but it's not a huge issue in the grand scheme.
But what about, she's self-censored and she self-deleted, and now we heard yesterday that their server was wiped clean at the end of last year. I mean, doesn't that leave some questions?
Not really. I mean, I do believe that she said she was dealing with a wedding and a funeral and a bunch of other stuff in personal emails, and I don't know if they're especially nationally significant. She is the former First Lady. There could be other things of a more secure nature that had to be conveyed as well. So, but if we find out that she intentionally destroyed things that she shouldn't have, which there'll be ways. I mean, look at NSA, right, is following all of us anyway right now. We know there's plenty of ways you can find this information out. Then it's another thing, but right now I don't think it's a very big story, and I don't think I've seen that from public opinion polls.
For the good of your party nationally, should she be challenged in a primary by somebody like Senator Warren?
I think a primary is a very important thing to have in a presidential race. One, every candidate gets tested through that primary process, so they're in the best shape possible for the November general election. But also, I want to make sure that, if I have a Democratic candidate, they represent my democratic values as best as possible, and I think you want to have a debate among Democrats at that point and among Republicans for where they're at. So if you just have a coronation as opposed to a primary system, I don't think it does that person who gets coronated any benefit to not being tested like they need to, and to make sure that they're really addressing the issues that are important to those of us who are going to represent
Who should challenge her in a primary? Should Joe Biden? Should Senator Warren? Should
I don't have
former Governor O'Malley?
I don't have an opinion on that. I just think there should be a primary. I think a primary is healthy for the system and for who ultimately is our nominee. And Elizabeth Warren, I think, has said she's not running definitively several times.
Many times.
Although I'm very impressed with Senator Warren. I think the people talking about it most have been Governor O'Malley, have been Jim Webb, former Senator Webb,
former Navy
Bernie
Secretary.
Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Independent.
But I don't know if any of them will ultimately do it or not. It's just I do think it's helpful to have a real primary.
Okay. Well, what are the odds right now that you think Hillary is the presidential nominee of your party, Mike?
Based on polling, she will win, it looks like, no matter what the primary system. So I would say a high percentage, 80% plus.
Okay.
If you're looking at the polling, which is what the best I can do. I don't have any better crystal ball than
right. Okay, now turning to Russ Feingold.
Yeah.
I've been watching him, his travels on Twitter and Facebook. He's been going around quietly, Milwaukee and Westfield and all that. There's no doubt in your mind he's going to run against Senator Johnson next year?
From everything I can see out of it, I think Russ Feingold is seriously looking at running again.
Have you talked to him?
I've talked to him as he's talked about many different things, including the amazing work actually he did in Africa, which I hope more people will find out what he did in his time.
Well, he's not granting interviews
so
now. All of us have tried
really?
in the Capitol.
Okay. Well, when you do ask him, the Congress
This is a quiet phase, but I hear he's going to come out more publicly in May, maybe at the state convention. Excuse me for interrupting.
We got a convention early June, so but I think
right, June 5 and 6.
He's very seriously looking at it, and I think if he does that, he's very likely to be the next U.S. Senator.
One thing you and I haven't talked about is the rapid ascension of Governor Walker into the top tier of Republican presidential candidates. Are you surprised at how he's now listed among the top 3, 4?
No, Charlie Cook did a really good analysis of this, and he said that basically, there's certain people appealing to the Tea Party, certain people to the evangelicals. Walker, in his kind of lane that he's running in, really the only other person is Rick Perry. So he's kind of got a unique lane that he's running in, which is, I think, helping him right now. I think his challenge is going to be whether or not he can really prove he's ready to be president, because so far, he's not answering a lot of questions, and when he is, he's answering them pretty foolishly. Do you think the president loves his country? I don't know. That answer is pretty easy. It's yes. No matter what president it is, they wouldn't be president otherwise. Do you think the president's a Christian? I don't know. I mean, these are ridiculous answers. Do you believe in evolution? I'm going to punt on this one. That's your inside voice, Governor, not your outside voice. This is the sort of stuff that unless he can improve on this, month of attention he's getting is going to go away pretty quick. But he does have a unique path to get there, and for no matter who is from Wisconsin running for president, as we saw with Tommy Thompson, if you don't do really well in Iowa, your odds diminish very, very quickly.
Yes.
You're expected to do well, so that's going to be probably a do-or-die state for him.
Do people come up to you in Congress and say, tell me about Scott Walker?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's the flavor of the month?
Absolutely.
And you tell him what?
Well, I tell him a lot.
Give us a short version.
Well, I think part of what they're seeing is someone who, has been wanting to run for president for a very, 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 very long time. This is the sole thing he thinks about when he wakes up and when he goes to bed, and I'm sure he dreams about it in between. And that's dangerous. I think what things he's doing right now in Wisconsin in the budget, $300 million hit to the university system after most states that had put cuts in when the economy crashed in 2008 are putting money back in. He's in a very small number of states not doing that. Wanting to change senior care, one of the most popular programs that my mother and many seniors rely on.
86,000 people
and count on. It's an important program. I think it's foolish what he's doing. You look at all these different things, right to work, there was absolutely no need. There was no request for it. In fact, the businesses said don't do it. don't do right to work because we've had labor peace in the state and it's worked well. I mean, everything he's done has been for himself. So I let people know, watch out, because, you know, in Milwaukee County he did this and he left and then someone had to clean up the mess. He's doing it now in Wisconsin. You know, eventually that'll come out nationally. You know, the National Press Corps are a bunch of honey badgers, right? They're going to, we may be badgers, they're honey badgers. They're going to grab them and not let go, and they're going to find all this stuff, and ultimately that doesn't make him a very strong nominee.
Can you envision a scenario under which he is the Republican presidential nominee, Congressman?
I think still Jeb Bush is going to be a big hurdle to, to pass. The Republicans generally go with the establishment candidate. That would be Jeb Bush. He's quietly right now doing what he's supposed to, raising lots and lots of money, letting Walker be the flavor of the month right now. He may be a little too moderate for some of the folks, but when you've got all these other conservatives also in a primary, you're going to divvy up that conservative vote. I still think Jeb Bush has the inside track. Scott Walker's job is to prove he's the anti-Jeb Bush, that he's the alternative. And I think, so far he's trying to do that, but he's really got to run a better campaign. He himself is his biggest detriment right now, and either he has to take some time to clean up, which I think he's doing. He's doing a fewer interviews right now, trying to get a little better versed, but you can't keep giving the kind of answers he's given and think you're going to get away with it.
But why can't your party beat him in 2010, 2012, and 2014?
Yeah, well, I think, there was first of all, we don't do as well, period, in off years, right, in Wisconsin. That's a phenomena that we've got, and that's undeniable, and it's something, it's a hurdle for us always to take a look at. But second, I think the recall made him stronger. 70% of the people on the day of the recall said they didn't like the idea of a recall, and, that allowed him to go around the country and have a national fundraising base. It's tough when you're in that position. Now, though, he's going down in the polls thanks to seeing the most recent budget, because now he's doing another presidential kind of, campaign budget rather than a budget for Wisconsin. And I think I'm actually hearing that people don't think he'll finish his term if he doesn't get elected president, because you can only do what he did in Milwaukee so long, leave it a mess and expect someone to clean it up. This budget is a mess, and I feel bad for the legislators who have to try to clean this up, because when you move on at some point, someone's got to pay the price of fixing this, and I don't think he's going to do the hard work to do that.
Well, where does he go? Does he go to a cabinet job?
What did Sarah Palin do? She went and was a talking head and made lots and lots of money.
That's true.
I think there's a big comparison between Scott Walker and Sarah Palin.
Okay. Now, but let's talk about the Wisconsin Democratic Party. There seems to be two major victories in recent elections: the re-election of President Obama and the election of Senator Tammy Baldwin.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the only statewide office holder right now is the Secretary of State.
We do really well in presidential election years when more people come out to vote. We don't do as well when we get a lower turnout, right? So that's been repeated now enough in recent years that we know that's what happens. So coming up is a presidential year. The U.S. Senate seat is up. I expect that that's very good for the Democrats, regardless of who the nominee, whether it's Russ Feingold or someone else. Congressional races, none of them are especially competitive with incumbents. The legislature has totally gerrymandered the state. That's why we don't see the difference in state legislative races. So, it really is this phenomena of in presidential years with more voters, Democrats do better. Question is, can we bring out more voters in those off years? And if you're not talking to those voters, you're not bringing them out, then Republicans are going to do better. So our challenge is, how do we talk to the voter that's the more casual voter to make them want to come out more often and support us?
The next major challenge for your party is the election of a new chairman. You have 5 candidates. Yeah. Have you endorsed anybody?
No.
Do you plan to?
Not at this point.
They've probably all called you.
I think they have, and I think I owe a few calls back right now. However, this is a weak party state. The state party doesn't do that much as far as, like Minnesota's a strong party state. They have an endorsement process, and that means a lot. If you get that endorsement here, they help kind of coordinate some of the funds around election time. And that's about it. There's not much else that holds someone to the party platform or anything. So I don't know if no offense to anyone running for party chair, but I don't know if that'll be any kind of a key element looking at 2016 or 2018.
Okay, but let's talk about the importance of the 2016 and 2018 and 2020 elections to your Wisconsin Democratic Party.
Very important. I mean, 16, I assume, will do well. It's a presidential year. Whether it's Hillary or someone else is the nominee, they're going to be in good place in Wisconsin and the U.S. Senate race. In 2018, I think what Scott Walker's doing right now is going to maybe help us break through and do better in that off year and maybe take the governorship. But Tammy Baldwin's also up for re-election, so it's going to be a very big year for Democrats in a generally bad year for voter turnout. So that's going to be the crucial one to watch. 16 is we have to get through that hurdle, but I keep my eye on 18 while I'm working on 16. And then, of course, you're going to get up to redistricting right at that point. So these are all real important. Having a Democratic governor in place in 2018 is one of the most important things I think we're going to be looking at.
Okay. Real quickly, since we're almost out of time, who should consider running for governor in 2018? On your list?
Yeah,
You?
No.
Okay.
No. I'm trying to do the job I'm doing the best I can in a difficult enough environment. I think there are a number of people. Ron Kind has at times expressed some interest in running statewide. I think there's some people like Kevin Conroy, with Exact Sciences, who's a very interesting figure, comes from the business community.
Yes.
Would be a great
He
candidate.
was talked about in 2014, but he was doing an IPO and this
With his
new
company,
rollout.
he's now going to add 750 jobs to 750 he already has. He's a great mind.
Yep.
Chris Abley from Milwaukee, county executive, is someone I think that people should always look at. I think he's done a great job fixing the mess that Scott Walker left, and sometimes had to make some very tough decisions, but he had a mess when he came into office. I think there's a lot of other people that eventually could come out. That's a long enough time off.
Okay.
I just think that we have to be smart about talking to the voters that don't always come out. I think in the last election, we had too many messages. We didn't have clear enough message. We didn't give a compelling enough reason why people should vote for Mary Burke, and now we have Scott Walker again. And I think we have to learn from that and make sure that we have a compelling enough reason that reaches out to that person to tell you why you would want to come out and vote for one of our people. And I think we forget to do that.
Final question. You've been getting on that plane to Washington now for a number of years. You've been running into the same dysfunction. What keeps you optimistic that it's going to get better in a dysfunctional D.C. and in Congress?
Well, one is just you have to have enormous patience, and I have way more than I even thought I had to be able to, through the legislature and through this. But you have to know that you can still get things done. We are still, I think, very effective in getting things done at federal agencies. We have enormously strong stories from dealing with casework for constituents. That's actually the most rewarding thing, is when you help someone, get the medals they should have had 62 years ago.
Or get reimbursed when a plane damages your property.
Get reimbursed when a plane damages your property, helping someone through the VA system. I mean, those are the things that are the most rewarding. But we've had success in working with the president and the agencies. So I'm part of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I serve as the first vice chair. We had asked the president last year for a couple things, to do an executive order around raising the minimum wage for federal contractors, and also around non-discrimination among federal contractors.
Yes.
He did both. When you do that, that's 22 to 24% of the economy. You affect the entire economy by doing that. We have still had successes, and you need those successes. Just don't assume it's how a bill becomes a law. That's a great cartoon on a Saturday morning. It just doesn't work right now. So as long as you get past that and realize there's a lot of other things you can do in your job, it gets you up every day working 12 or 14 hours to get it done. And you have to have that attitude. If it gets to the point that I think it's so broken, I'm not going to keep doing it. I already have no hair. I don't have much else to go. I'll then deal with things back home.
I appreciate it. Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat from the 2nd District, thanks for the update on the new Congress and things political.
Thank you, Steve. Yep.
Thank you.